My name is Gallego still. Thank you so much for showing up. I appreciate Alex introducing me. I'm not looking for any kind of, this is part of the talk where we give our bona fides, where I've worked, what my title is. I'm a software engineer, and that's enough. I've broken production, I've done average work, I deploy boring technology. That's a good thing. We shouldn't be embarrassed about that. We should be celebrating the kind of everyday work that we're doing every day. What I will say is I do love looking into our systems, seeing how things work, especially incidents. There's something that feels magical about that. New languages, new technologies will come and go, and working through them. But people are here, people are staying. We need to figure out how we are working in the socio part of our socio-technical systems. Now, right off the bat, I want to start off by making a bet. I believe that everyone here, should they choose to, can go back to their jobs and do a little bit of resilience engineering. Now, to you, that might sound pretty straightforward. It's like, that's why we are all here today, to learn something to bring back potentially. To folks who have been doing resilience engineering, they realize the depth and breadth of that statement, and that is a lot to ask of people. I don't think you need to master it. You don't need to be an expert in it. You don't need to figure out all the ins and outs, but starting off in the path, doing good, solid, everyday work will help you out immensely. And once you fall through the looking glass, I don't think you'll see your systems the same way. There's also plenty of talented, smart, energetic, kind, deeply empathetic people here that I think you can handle. Now, I do want to start by giving a small definition. And I've been guilty of this in the past, of giving very long and heavy, weighty definitions about resilience engineering and resilience. What I will say is, resilience is adapting to the unexpected. It's incomplete. There are lots of missing parts to it, but it's rough enough to get us started today. Experts give varying and deep definitions of it that are fantastic to break off all sorts of ideas and theories about it. I want to start small, especially because those experts don't necessarily agree on the entire definition of it. The Venn diagram of definitions is not a perfect circle, and I don't want to get lost in the messy middle. People working in socio-technical systems need to adapt, and that's what we're working with today. I also want to talk about adaptive capacity. Fixing something in your system, adapting to it, changing on the fly is not the same as adaptive capacity. Adaptive capacity is our ability to, in the future, work in our system such that adaptation can work. Adaptation is possible. Here's an example. You're in an incident. We reach for our runbook. Great, the service is down. Shows us what tools to use, how to respond to it, teams to contact. We start working through our runbook. What happens when reality is different from our runbooks? Do we keep trying at the runbook and hoping it just works? We have to change on the fly. We are off from a set course. We're figuring things out on the fly. We're working through it as a team. That experience that we've developed over years of work helps inform that adapting. How we work together, how we bring together new bands of communication. That's what we're looking at, that's what we're thinking about when we're thinking of adaptive capacity. We can look at it another way, too. It doesn't have to be in the context of failures. How about reorgs? Reorgs, when they happen, and for anyone with any kind of significant tenure in the industry, is going to go through probably several reorgs. And when reorgs happen, priorities change, roadmaps change, teams change, ownership of products changes. And everything that's lost in there or changed in there, we have to work with. We have to adapt to, so that to avoid the next failure that comes up. Now I want to take a quick detour from talking about resilience and ask a question. Who here enjoys reading fantasy novels? Show of hands. All right. Good number of you. I am as well. One of my favorite series is The Kingkiller Chronicle, if anyone's familiar with that. It's about a young orphan boy who goes off and learns magic at a school. Stop me if you've heard that before. It has a deep and complex magic system in it, which I'm a big fan of. And one of the forms of magic is the art of naming. How do you know something so deeply, so inherently, so well, they have complete control over it? You know its first true name, and you're able to master it. So on the first day of a term, class is in session, the master name of the school, Eldon, walks into class, rushes to the front of class. What are we doing here today? Pulls out a stone in his pocket. You could study the stone, look at its density, look at its grit, how the light just reflects off it, just so. You could study the stone for a full month, do nothing but, and catch just the barest glimpse of what the stone is. But that's what we're trying to do in the art of naming. How do you understand something that cannot be understood? Without waiting for a response on how that can be done, he immediately pulls out several sheets of paper and starts handing it to the class. And he walks back to the front of class. Okay, in 15 minutes, I'm going to stand like so. I'm going to square off my shoulders, I'm going to hold this stone, I'm going to throw it backwards in about 3 grips worth of force. After 15 minutes are done, I want you to tell me where you need to put your hand so when the stone falls, you can catch it. Begin. So the class starts piling and they start pulling out ideas and theories, complex mathematics, physics, even psychology. They're trading ideas back and forth, they're writing things down, there's a scramble. And after 15 minutes, they say to each other, we don't know where it's going to land. Good, Eldon claps. That is the correct answer. Now watch this. He walks into the hallway, brings a young boy in the class, stands in the back of the room, goes back to where he says, catch, throws the stone. Caught by surprise, the young boy snatches his hand up, catches the stone in the air. Eldon, a bit of a crackpot, claps wildly, a little giddily like a child, congratulates the boy, ushers him out. Comes back to the beginning of the class. Okay, how is it that was accomplished? Entire classroom with the brightest minds in our university were unable to complete in 15 minutes what a young boy was able to do in less than a second. Because in each of us, there is an awake mind and a sleeping mind. And this sleeping mind is picking up all sorts of signals, all sorts of ideas. It is processing constantly. We're not even aware of it, below our conscious. That sleeping mind is so powerful that a young boy can do in a second what all of you could not do in 15 minutes. This is what we're trying to do in resilience. Finding the invisible parts of our system, improving upon them, things that are everyday, that are all around us, that we're not even noticing we're fixing and adapting to and changing to. Highlighting that, surfacing that, and then improving upon it. When we talk about resilience, we're often talking about investigations and incidents. This makes a lot of sense. They're clear indications of some sort of change event in our system. Obviously, something we want to avoid. We don't want failure in our system. We don't want outages. How can we prevent this? How can we make sure it doesn't happen again or it's not as bad next time? And this is important. We should continue to do this. I also want us to focus on the everyday work, the invisible things that prevent major outages. The stuff that we do such that failure is handled in smaller ways that don't cascade into larger failures. Now, so much of this information being invisible also requires a lot of time, a lot of investment. We can't even guarantee that investment is going to pay off. But we want to approach incidents in such a way that as we're getting closer to the edge of failure, that saturation point of we're okay, we failed, we can catch ourselves before that. And to do that, we can't wait for failures to come. We don't want incidents to be the only indication of any kind of signal in our system. We want to look for other signals as well. And how do we do this? How do we figure out what other people aren't seeing and notice it? Share it with each other, develop expertise around that. We need to gain insights to what's going on such that we can share this information. There's a fantastic book by Gary Klein called Seeing What Others Don't. And in it, he highlights some of the ways that people have explored what it means to look at incidents, what it means to explore how people are trying to improve their systems. And there's a formula he uses where he says that performance is lowering errors and raising insights. Now, of course, we're here because we want to lower errors. That's a good thing. We want fewer errors, fewer failures in our systems. At some point, though, we can't reduce the number of errors anymore. So how do we increase performance? We have to bump insights. Insights allowed us to build new features, develop, function as a system. How do we do that? How do we figure out the ways we have aha moments all the time to make them happen more often, to make them occur when we want to? And this is especially a challenging situation. He has a couple theories in the book, and I won't belabor all of them because that is entire talk amongst itself, but some of the things he mentions are reducing fatigue. How are we able to have more time, more conscious thought, sometimes subconscious thought, to let ideas surface? How are we letting ideas form without trying to wrestle them into perfect language? If you've ever had to write a story or a document, anything to pass around people, and you want to have just the right words to make sure your language is crystal clear, you've understood how this works. That trying to get that idea before it falls apart, get it in paper, but get it right, and you're going back and forth about it, and you have the idea disappear into the ether, and you've also got a mess of a sentence. You've felt that before. We also have to validate these ideas. We can't just say, great, it works, yep, trust me, and then go forth with it. How are we validating them with A/B tests or any kind of experiments to understand that? There are two terms he uses, especially around this. Now, I've been talking about insights, but he also mentions intuitions, and he differs them as such. He says that intuitions are existing patterns we apply over and over. I see this, I've got this heuristic I use, I'm going to apply it, it worked, move forward. Insights are different. That's the way we're developing new patterns for future work. And that's what we want to talk about here. How are we getting those insights? Jumping back to adaptive capacity. We want to have this adaptive capacity, this ability to, when failure is approaching and reaches us, to change our systems, bring us back into stability. How are we improving upon this adaptive capacity? I will say first and foremost that we should be focusing on networking and sharing. What's the expertise that we have as a team that we can bring in and share around so we're losing these islands of knowledge? And it's not just, I came up with an idea, pass along. It's how are we developing these ideas? What processes are we using so that these ideas surface? It's one thing to say, I came up with something and hand it to someone, but to show someone that same process and develop ideas to try to apply that process elsewhere is important as well. Now, if we're understanding and exploring the ways in which we're discovering where the edge of failure is so that we can potentially push it back and look at this adaptive capacity, we can look at some places in our day-to-day work that is potentially troublesome to us or difficult we're working with. So, for starters, toilsome work. Now, we want to reduce the toil as much as possible. But we also acknowledge that toil is within our systems. How are we acknowledging why we need it? Are there ways of improving upon it or just understanding how the day-to-day work can be spread around? How often do we have dark and unfrequented parts of our code base that no one wants to touch? Sometimes we need to take a deep dive into those code bases and those parts of the branches we don't want to touch. You might say, well, if we go into that branch, that code base, I don't understand how it works. That could break something. We need to risk failure to avoid failure, which is a tough idea to grapple with, but something we necessarily need. We also need to look at features that have multiple owners. How often we do reorgs and somehow a service has multiple people working on it, and they have different perspectives on that. What are their priorities for it? What are the requirements? How are they approaching it with their own different experience and sharing that back and forth between teams? What happens when there's overlap and two people own a service and say, not it? I also want to talk about support coverage. Now, for SREs, that support coverage tends to imply on-call, and it's a good thing to talk about. What was your last week like? What are you expecting next week? I also want to focus on customer support, which is something we don't often delve into. Customer support people know so much more than we give them credit for, and I think we can do a great service by talking to them more often. What are they hearing from our customers that we don't know? They have deep expertise that's going to help us in our day-to-day work. Strengthening adaptive capacity means describing and mapping these pressures, these potential outcomes, hazards, and opportunities that we're working with. So great, you developed a little adaptive capacity, you're feeling better about your system. Unfortunately, that's not enough, and this is the really hard part with being resilient. You can't have a hack week on adaptivity. You can't say, hey, we took a week, we learned some stuff, great, we're good for the rest of the year, we have a budget on adaptive capacity. That's not how it works. Adaptive capacity is a victim of its own success. When you start understanding the boundary better and pushing it further back and routing around it, errors and failures will route around you. Your system changes as you're understanding it. Your mental model is applied, the system changes, your mental model becomes further and further shifted away from that. How do we handle that? Only practitioners are able to establish and develop and sustain this adaptive capacity. You can't outsource that. It has to be people doing the day-to-day work for that to work. Ideas on how to make that happen. Who here would feel great about letting someone who's new to a team, early career, run an incident? Who here feels like they could let them run a project? Tends to be that Staff Plus folks come up with the ideas, develop the plan, here's what I'm gonna work with, and dole out tickets. What if you let someone who is new to a service, new to a team, run the incident? That also means they're likely to be slower to respond, to look at code paths and observability patterns that might lead to dead ends. They might lead to places that are going to let the incident drag out longer. They might have unorthodox bands of communication too. This is important to note. As they're asking different questions, developing new ideas, gathering new insights, seeing what they don't as part of this. Outwardly, I also want us to talk about how we are determining risk. Risk is shared among people. It can be developed individually and shared amongst a team, but as part of that, it is a shared negotiation as well. It does not exist in objective reality. It is our interpretation of our systems. I also want to think about what we're doing to institutionalize knowledge. Now, I'm going to say a hard thing, that in the last year plus, we've seen massive layoffs again and again and again, and that's tough. We don't know the extent of what that looks like. What about all the institutionalized knowledge we've lost as part of that? People with expertise that they were unfortunately unable to share, or we lost entire teams that owned a service and it's just handed off to someone else. You figure it out now. We're going to have outages and failures as a part of that. Exploring those situations, if we don't control over the layoffs, we at least can understand what are the risks now we're facing with folks who are holding the pager for services they did not build. Likewise, when there are massive layoffs, people get scared, as you can imagine. People become risk averse. They become indecisive, because being decisive means you might make a change that breaks something, and then you're next to be fired. As we're approaching the edge of failure, we're in a stable place, and our systems are changing around us, and pressures are pushing on our system. Systems don't always fall over right away. That's because, as part of this adaptive capacity, part of the adapting that people are doing in their systems, we have this term that Dr. David Woods has coined, graceful extensibility. The idea here is that as we approach the edge, we can stretch out our resources to overcome this failure mode. How are we looking at disturbances and extending ourselves, our understanding of things, asking questions, talking with folks on the fly so that we can avoid these failures. As part of this too, graceful extensibility is not fixed. We're stretching, the system stretches around us, failures pop up in different ways, we stretch to meet those failures. new failures crop around. There's this back and forth. Graceful extensibility itself is dynamic. Now, as part of this also, this expertise that we're developing to allow this graceful extensibility to happen will cover up failures. This expertise that we're developing hides that effort to route around these failures. It makes it look like things were obvious and they just worked out because that systems were safer than we thought. Story. We have a software engineer who is good at their job. They are being proactive. They're jumping into customer support. They see bugs and tickets pop up, and they say, oh, cool, I'll grab that real fast. Or, hey, I was actually working on that message in customer support. Customers feel great about that. They love it. You're so responsive. Things always just work. Thanks so much for that work. The software engineer goes on PTO for a bit. Suddenly there's a bug that pops up, and that response time isn't so great. Customers start getting upset. What's going on? Why are things failing now? We're expecting this fast response, and we're not getting it. All that expertise, that knowledge, those patterns that the person has developed are now gone. This coordination of understanding what's going on takes effort. You have to worry about conflicting risks, conflicting interests, goals around this. And that's challenging to think about. We also need to think about how we're keeping capacity for folks. How often are you on an incident that is dragging on, and you're feeling exhausted, you're feeling fatigued? And maybe you're waiting for a script to work, or someone to come up with a code PR to deploy out there, and you need a break. How often are you telling people, go take a break, get 15 minutes of rest, come back, or leave the call entirely? How often are we asking senior people, don't join this call. In case it gets really bad later on, we might need you. Now, I'm asking a lot of everyone. Look at everything you do every day. Write it down, review it, talk to people, talk to everyone in your org. That's a lot to ask. How do we know this is too much? How do we know that we can't handle any more? Fortunately, our systems tell us very readily when time is enough. We can't prepare for everything. We can't get everything in place. We can't understand all of our patterns. Things are always invisible to us or always going to be under the surface. It's a point we can't dig up to. I like to ask two questions of folks who are trying to focus on where they should invest their energy. First is, what scares you the most? That question says, where do you feel like the risks are in your system? How deep are they? That's a good place to invest. If something scares you, work on it. Try to build a team around it to develop expertise around that. Determine where the risks are on that. Do it over and over again if that risk feels reduced. You feel commonplace, it feels like an everyday piece of work. The other side of that coin is, what do you have confidence in? Now, confidence for this can work two ways. It can be what parts of our system are working such that we feel we can share that expertise with other parts of our system or not. Are the deploy queues for one system flowing well and not backed up, PRs coming through, and another system not? Where's the difference there? Apply the expertise from one system to another. Another part of that, though, is when you're confident about a system, that's when surprises happen. This has never broken before. Why would it break now? Why should we invest in something that's never broken? And then when it fails, you go, oh, right. That makes sense now. So take time to invest in places where you're very confident in things working. Now, as I said before, risk and safety are subjective negotiations. People are going to have different interpretations of what risky means in different systems. We often pull back on this thoroughness when we feel like our systems are safe enough. That usually tells us, okay, we've done too much, let's work on other stuff. And that's where we get to a trade-off here. It's called efficiency versus thoroughness. There's a great book titled The Edo Principle by Dr. Eric Holnagel. Edo stands for Efficiency Thoroughness Trade-off. We are limiting ourselves intentionally and unintentionally over time because inherent pressures of our system, moving faster, make things better, how can we make things more dynamic, how can we produce more, pull us away from this thoroughness. How are we taking deep dives into work? anomalous events, and that could be incidents, but it could also be near misses, it can be successes, it can be just small inefficiencies, then pull us away from that efficiency. This back and forth is another dynamic part of our system. Jumping back between efficiency to thoroughness, we have an incident, want to be a little more thorough, things are feeling safe, we're feeling more confident in our system, we're moving to be more efficient. Near miss, all right, that scares me a little bit, let's take some time to invest in this. Example of this. When we run incidents, a lot of us are running Slack or other chat systems. Someone asks a question, hey Will, can you look at the database to tell me if it is in good shape? I might drop a thumbs up reaction on it. Yep, I'm on it. It's a shorthand in a high tempo situation to say, I'm doing this thing. But what happens when those bands of communication start to get a little fuzzy, a little anomalous? Hey Will, can you tell me if the system is okay? Thumbs up. I mean, I'm on it. The person asking the question might think, great, system is great. It's in good shape. Let's deploy and things fall over. Exploring those situations, also important. What are shorthand, what shortcuts we're taking every day? We can't look at all the places that have been in the past for all of our answers, but we want to. This is because resilience is an adaptation. We are adapting to surprises. Surprises, by very definition, are saying things that caught us off guard and happened existing or in the past. So a lot of this work feels very reactive. We have to respond to something, we have to jump to it after the fact. There are common threads, though, that we can look at as part of this. How do we look at the structures of our system? How do we find the gaps in our system that separate organizations, separate parts of our system, and look between the porous membrane between them? This here is a desire path. It's also called sometimes a game trail. There's other versions of it. This is a picture of Ohio State University, very lovely walkway. It goes around bends and leads you to buildings and such. And that's what the planners designed as part of this. They want you to walk the path. Humans being humans, though, we cut right through. Here's a shortcut. I don't want to walk around. And that mechanical motion develops a new path. We do this in our systems all the time. How are we developing these new paths? Are we noticing when we do? Example, marketing is having a launch soon. We have to develop a new release. We're working on a new product, a new feature. The engineering team and the marketing team are working back and forth as part of that. The heads of each team are collaborating, chatting, disseminating information down to their team, and then sharing it to the other head of the other team, back and forth. This is an inefficiency, right? I have to wait to tell my manager whenever they're available. My manager has to tell the other manager or head of the team when they're available. They have to pass it around to everyone else on their team. There's a lot of steps in that. We develop shortcuts. Say, hey, I'm going to grab so-and-so in marketing and let them know what's up. These shortcuts are ways we are looking towards improving expertise, sharing that information out. But that band of communication when you develop between these two teams, these two individuals, where there is not a clear path, how are we developing that more? Why are we doing that? Are we making sure the information doesn't go just between those two people, it is spreading out entirely through the teams? I want to look at other places we're thinking about this in terms of language as well, and communication. How often in an incident, where things are getting stressful, they're high tempo, we're getting pressure, that someone who's been on call for a while, maybe they've responded to a bunch of pages that week, they say, I can keep going. I'm okay. I got this. Some internal guilt maybe. You don't want to pass off the page to someone else and have them feel it. Or maybe you're looking for a promotion. You want to make sure that you're getting to it, that you don't want to feel like you're falling down the job. Asking questions like this, are you making sure that other people in your systems who are responding to the best they can have capacity to extend if needed? Now, I do think that giving folks a chance to communicate, asking those questions proactively, not waiting for them to respond, and really thoroughly asking, are you really okay? Are things really in a good state? What would 15 minutes take? What would passing the pager over for a night and getting some good rest do for you? These are important things to do when we're taking care of each other, we're developing this system, this network that we're working through, sharing this information. We found some places that we're looking. We've got some ideas on how to work through it. We've got a ton of cases we want to work through. But again, we only have so much time. How do we build confidence that those systems can work such that we're looking into them and we're spending the most time? How are we getting the most out of our investments? How are you developing confidence in them? Tracing back from incidents, from near misses, from outages, back to these places where researching, where cases line up, where they affect things, that's how you're doing it. Getting a sense for this is another part of expertise in our system. It's not just, I know how to turn on and off a system if something goes wrong. It's all about how do I understand the system as I'm working through it and sharing expertise, and getting better at sharing expertise. Now, for my next slide, I want to talk about AI for a second, because it's prevalent in our industry right now, and I'm using the general term of AI as we're describing it. We're going to see a lot more tooling based on AI, and I'm not going to speak broadly about that because there are lots and lots of deep conversations about that. What I will address is resilience in AI. AI cannot generate resilience, period. It can't do it. It can't adapt. AI is based on computers. Computers can't adapt. They are finding code paths. They are large switch statements and if statements. They're building data models, sure, but they cannot change on the fly. They're unable to do that. LLMs have no concept of socio-technical graphs. They don't understand the nuances between teams, communications that they're either not seeing or can't fully parse. They don't know societal pressures. They don't understand what it means to go up for promotion. They don't understand what it means to be fatigued. AI, as we currently have it defined, does not give us facts. It gives us truth-like statements. And when you're building your systems to understand them, you need data that is strong. You don't need semi-like facts as part of that. AI can also only can explore ideas that exist, because it can only take data that it has and remix it or transform it slightly, give it to you in different packages. It can't bring new insights from that. It can't see outside of that transformation. And if none of that convinces you, what I'll say is that computers cannot be responsible and held accountable for their decisions. If computers cannot be held accountable, they can't be blame-aware. We're looking to do blame-aware retrospectives or postmortems. And if you're basing your postmortem on a computer trying to understand blame, you're going to fail. So to close out, we've looked at a bunch of ways we can explore this. I've missed so many parts of this. This is a wide and deep topic. There are places I cannot capture. I'm still working through this myself. I'm no perfect expert in this. I'm still learning as I go. And I want to encourage folks to see it the same way. You don't have to be an expert at this to start digging into these topics, start looking to them. I've gotten on stage before and given bad definitions of things, and now I kind of cringe a little bit and go, but they still let me back on stage. I'm here right now. Don't worry, it's okay to fail. It's okay to come back and try again. One of my other favorite authors is Kurt Vonnegut. And if you're familiar with him, he has a saying that if this isn't nice, I don't know what is. I'm going to steal from him, because if you're going to steal from the best. And he had a talk about 20 years ago where he tried this. So I want everyone here to take a moment. We're going to think about a stressful situation, an incident, an outage, a failure, where things felt really, really dire. Like there was no way out. You're taking the lead. You don't know the answers. You're scrambling to look at things. Maybe some change you just made and released to production just made a lot of people really unhappy, internally and externally. Maybe that promotion you were about to get is going to be skewed because of this. Maybe you're about to blow 4 nines into 3 nines. It's really hard to manage. Now, and remember that we are here today. We survived. We did it. We figured it out. And in between the start of that failure mode and getting today, there were people who helped us out. There are people as part of that socio-technical system who advised us, who gave us questions and answers sometimes, pointed us in the right direction, left crumb trails so that we could follow. Being that for someone else is a huge win. And if you can think about your systems in a way that you are helping the next person out, and be that person for someone else, that's a fantastic place to be. And if that isn't nice, I don't know what else is. Thank you for your time.